Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm gonna do a segment of the reading Rainstorm where we're reading the Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, the anatomy lesson. When I was little, 4 or 5, my greatest fear was that someday my mother might not come home from work. Addition and subtraction were useful mainly insofar as they helped me track her movements. How many minutes until she left the office? How many minutes to walk from office to subway? And even before I learned to count, I've been obsessed with learning to read a clock face, desperately studying the occult circle ground on the paper plate that, once mastered, would unlock the pattern of her comings and goings. Usually she was home when she said she'd be, so if she was 10 minutes late, I began to fret any later, and I sat on the floor by the front door of the apartment like a puppy left alone too long, straining to hear the rumble of the elevator coming up to our floor. Almost every day in elementary school, I heard things on the Channel 7 that worried me. What if some bum in a dirty fatigue jacket pushed my mother onto the tracks while she was waiting for the 6 train, or muscled her into a dark doorway and stabbed her for her pocketbook? What if she dropped her hair dryer in the bathtub, or got knocked in front of car by a bicycle, or was given the wrong medicine at the dentist and died, as had happened to the mother of a classmate of mine? To think of something happening to my mother was especially frightening because my dad was so unreliable, I guess, in the diplomatic way of putting it. Even when he was in a good mood, he did things like lose his paycheck and fall asleep with the front door of the apartment open because he drank. And when he was in a bad mood, which was much of the time, he was red-eyed and clammy looking, his suit so rumpled it looked like he'd been rolling on the floor in it, and an era of unnatural stillness emanating from him, as if from some pressurized article about to explode. Although I didn't understand why he was so unhappy, it was clear to me that his unhappiness was our fault. My mother and I had gotten on his nerves. It was because of us that he had a job he could not stand. Even everything we did was irritating. He particularly didn't enjoy being around me, not that he often was. In the morning, as I got ready for school, he sat puffy-eyed and silent over his coffee with the Wall Street Journal in front of him, his bathrobe open and his hair standing up in cowlicks, and sometimes he was so shaky that the cup sloshed as he brought it to his mouth, where he eyed me. When I came in, nostrils flaring as if I'd made too much noise with the silverware or the cereal bowl. Apart from his daily awkwardness, I didn't see him in much. He didn't eat dinner with us or attend school functions. He didn't play with me or talk to me a lot when he was at home. In fact, he was seldom at home at all until after my bedtime. And some days, paydays especially, every other Friday, he didn't come clattering in until 3 or 4 in the morning, banging the doors, dropping his briefcase, crashing and bumping around so erratically that sometimes I bolted awake in terror, staring at the glow-in-the-dark planetarium stars on the ceiling and wondering if a killer had broken into the apartment. Luckily, when he was drunk, his footsteps slowed into a jarring and unmistakable cadence. Frankenstein steps. I thought of them, deliberate and clumping, with the absurdly long pauses between each footfall. And as I stood, I realized it was only him thudding around there in the dark and not some serial murderer or psychopath. I would drift back into a fretful doze. The following day, Saturday, my mother and I would contrive to be out of the apartment before he woke up from his sweaty, tangled sleep on the sofa. Otherwise, we would spend the whole day creeping around, afraid of shutting the door too loudly, of disturbing him in any way, while he sat stony-faced in front of the television with a Chinese beer from takeout placed and a glassy look in his eye, watching the news or sports with the sound off. Consequently, neither my mother nor I had been overly troubled when we woke up one Saturday and found he hadn't come home at all. It was Sunday before we started getting concerned, and even then we didn't worry the way you normally would. It was the start of college football season. It was pretty sure thing that he had money on some of the games, and we thought he'd gotten on the bus and gone to Atlantic City without telling us. Not until the following day when my father's secretary Loretta called because he hadn't shown up at work did we start to appear that something was seriously wrong. My mother, fearing he'd been robbed or killed coming out of drunk from a bar, phoned the police, and we spent several tense days waiting for a phone call or a knock on the door. Then, towards the end of the week, a sketchy note from my dad arrived, postmarked Newark, New Jersey, informing us in a high-strung scrawl that he was headed off to start a new life in an undisclosed location. I remember pondering the phrase, "a new life," as if it actually might reveal some hint of where he'd gone. For after I battered and clamored and pestered my mother for about a week, she finally consented to let me see the letter myself. "Well, all right," she said, resigned as she opened the desk drawer and fished it out. "I don't know what he expects me to tell you. You might as well hear it from him." It was written on stationery from a DoubleTree Inn near the airport. I believed it might contain valuable clues to his whereabouts, but instead I was struck by its extreme brevity. 4 or 5 lines, and its speedy, careless, go-to-hell sprawl, like something he dashed off before running out to the grocery store. In many respects, it was a relief to have my father out of the picture. Certainly I didn't miss him much, and my mother didn't seem to miss him either, though it was sad when she had to let our housekeeper, Cinza, go because we couldn't afford to pay her. Cinza had cried and offered to stay and work for free, but my mother had found her a part-time job in the building, working for a couple with a baby. Once a week or so, she stopped in to visit my mother for a cup of coffee, still in the smock she wore over her clothes when she cleaned. Without fanfare, the photo of a younger, suntanned dad sat atop a ski slope came down from the wall, and it was replaced by one of my mother and me at the brink of Central Park. At night, my mother sat up late with the calculator going over bills. Even though the apartment was rent stabilized, getting by without my dad's salary was month-by-month adventure, since whatever new life he fashioned for himself elsewhere did not include sending money for child support. Basically, we were content enough doing our own laundry down in the basement, going to the matinees instead of full-price movies, eating day-old baked goods and cheap Chinese carry-out, noodles, egg foo young, and counting out nickels and dimes for bus fare. But as I trudged home from the museum that day, cold and wet, with a tooth-crunching headache, it struck me that with my dad gone, no one in the world would be particularly worried about my mother or me. No one was sitting around wondering where we'd been all morning or why they hadn't heard from us. Wherever he was off in his new life, tropics or prairie, tiny ski towns or major American city, he would certainly be riveted to the television, and it was easy to imagine that maybe he was even getting a little frantic and wound up, as he sometimes did over big news stories that have absolutely nothing to do with him, hurricanes and bridge collapses in distant states. But would he be worried enough to call and check on us? Probably not. No more than he would be likely to call his old office and see what was happening. Though certainly he would be thinking of his ex-colleagues in the Midtown and wondering how all the bean counters and pencil pushers, as he referred to his coworkers, were faring at 101 Park. Were the secretaries getting scared, gathering their pictures off their desk and putting their walking shoes and going home? Or was it turning into a subdued party of sorts at the 14th floor, people ordering in sandwiches and gathering around the television in the conference room? Though the walk home took forever, I don't remember much about it except a certain rainy, cold, rain-shrouded mood on Madison Avenue. Umbrellas bobbing, the crowds on the sidewalks, flowing silently downtown. A sense of huddled anonymity, like old black and white photos I'd seen of bank crashes and bread lines in 1930s. My headache and the rain constricted the world to such a tight, sick circle that I saw little more than the hunchbacks of people ahead of me on the sidewalk. In fact, my head hurt so badly that I could hardly see where I was going at all, and a couple of times I was nearly hit by cars when I plowed into the crosswalks without paying attention to the light. Nobody appeared to know anything what had happened, and although I overheard North Korea blaring from the radios of parked curb and Iran and Al-Qaeda, murdered by the number of passerbyers, and scrawny black man with dreadlocks drenched to the bone was pacing back and forth out in front of the Whitney Museum, jabbing at the air with his fingers and shouting boldly shouting to nobody in particular, "Buckle up, Manhattan. Osama bin Laden is rocking us again." Though I felt faint, I wanted to sit down. Somehow I kept hobbling along with a hitch in my step like a particularly broken toy. Cops gestured. Cops whistled and beckoned, water dripping off of the end of my nose, over and over blinking at the rain from my eyes. The thought coursed through my mind. I had to get home to my mother as soon as I could. She would be waiting frantically for me at the apartment. She would be tearing her hair out with worry, cursing herself for having taken my phone. Everyone was having problems getting calls through the pedestrians, where line 10 and 20 deep at a few payphones on the street. Mother, I thought, mother, trying to send her a psychic message that I was alive. I wanted her to know I was all right, but at the same time, I remember telling myself it was okay. I was walking instead of running. I didn't want to pass out on the way home. How lucky she had walked away only a few moments before. She had sent me directly to the heart of the explosion. She was sure to think I was dead. And to think of the girl who saved my life made my eyes smart. Pippa, an odd, dry name for a rusty, wry little redhead. It suited her. Whenever I thought of her eyes on mine, I felt dizzy at the thought that she, a perfect stranger, had saved me from walking out of the exhibition and into the black flash of the postcard shop. Nada. The end of everything. Would I ever get to tell her she'd saved my life? As for the old man, the firemen and the rescue people had rushed into the building only minutes after I got out, and I still had hopes that someone had made it back in to rescue him. The door was jacked. They knew where he was in there. Would I ever see either of them again? When I finally made it home, I was chilled to the bone, punch drunk and stumbling, water streaming from my sodden clothes and wound wound behind me in an uneven trail across the lobby. After the crowds on the streets, the air of desertion was unnerving. Although the portable television was going in the baggage room, I heard walkie-talkies sputtering somewhere in the building. There was no sign of Goldie or Carlos or Jose or any of the regular guys. Farther back, the lighted cabinet of the elevator stood empty and waiting like a stage cabinet in a magic act. The gears caught and shuddered one by one. The pearly, odd, old deco numbers blinked past as I creaked up to the 7th floor. Stepping into my own drab hallway, I was overwhelmed with relief. Mouse brown paint, stuffy, carpet cleaner smell and all. The key turned noisily in the lock. "Hello?" I called, stepping into the dimness of the apartment. Shades down, all quiet. In the silence, the refrigerator hummed. God, I thought with a terrible jolt. Isn't she home yet? Mother! I called again with rapid sinking heart. I walked fast through the foyer and then stood confused in the middle of the living room. Her keys weren't on the peg by the door. Her bag wasn't on the table. Wet shoes squinching in the stillness. I walked to the kitchen. It wasn't much of a kitchen, only an alcove with 2 burner stoves facing an air shaft. There sat her coffee cup, green glass from the flea market, with lipstick print on the rim. I stood staring at the unwashed coffee cup with an inch of gold coffee at the bottom and wondered what to do. My ears were ringing and whooshing and my head hurt so badly I could scarcely think. Waves of blackness on the edge of my vision. I'd been so fixed on how worried she would be on making it home to tell her I was okay that it had never occurred to me that she might not be home herself. Wincing with every step, I walked down the hallway to my parents' bedroom, especially unchanged since my father had left, but more cluttered and feminine looking now that it was hers alone. The answering machine on the table and by the thumbed and mussed-up bed was dark, no messages. Standing at the doorway, half reeling in pain, I tried to concentrate. A jarring sensation of the day's movement jolted through my body as if I'd been riding a car for far too long. First things first, find my phone, check my messages. Only I didn't know where my phone was. She had taken it away after I was suspended. The night before, when she was in the shower, I tried to find it by calling the number, but apparently she turned it off. I remember plunging my hands in the top drawer of her bureau and clawing through the bewilderment of scarves, silks, and velvets, Indian embroideries. Then, with immense effort, even though I wasn't very heavy, I dragged over the bench at the end of her bed and climbed on it so that I could look up the top shelf of the closet. Afterwards, I sat on the carpet in semi-stupor with my cheek leaning against the bench with an ugly white roar in my ears. Something was wrong. I remember raising my head with a sudden blaze of conviction that gas was sweeping out the kitchen stove and that I was being poisoned from the gas leak, except I couldn't smell any gas. I might have gone into the little bathroom of her bedroom and looked into the medicine cabinet for an aspirin, something for my head. I don't know. All I know for sure was that at some point I was in my room, not knowing how I got there, bracing myself with one hand against the wall by my bed and feeling like I was going to be sick. And then everything was so confused, I can't give a clear account of it all, until I sat up disoriented in the living room sofa at the sound of something like a door opening. But it wasn't the front door, only somebody else down the hall. The room was dark and I couldn't hear afternoon traffic, rush hour traffic. Out on the streets, in the dimness, I was still for a heart-stopping moment or two as the noise sorted themselves out and the familiar lines of the table lamp, lyre-shaped chairs, chair backs grew visible against the twilight window. "Mom?" I said, and the crackle of panic was plainly audible in my voice. I had fallen asleep in my gritty, wet clothes. The sofa was damp too, with the clammy, body-shaped depression where I'd been lying down on it. A chilly breeze rattled with the ventilation blinds through the window my mother had left partially open that morning. The clock said 6:47 p.m. With growing fear, I walked stiffly around the apartment, turning on all the lights, even the overhead lights in the living room, which were generally we didn't use because they were so stark and bright. Standing in the doorway of my mother's bedroom, I saw a red light blinking in the dark. A delicious wave of relief washed over me. I darted around the bed, fumbled for the button of the answering machine, and it was several seconds before I realized that the voice was not my mother at all, but a woman my mother worked with, sounding uncountably cheerful. "Hi, Aubrey. Prue here. Just checking in. Crazy day, eh? Listen, the galley poofs are in for Pajira, and we need to talk, but the deadline's been postponed, so no worries. For now, anyways. I hope you're holding up, love. Give a call when you got a chance." I stood there for a long time, looking down at the machine after the message beeped off. Then I lifted up the edge of the blinds and peeked out into the traffic. It was that hour, people coming home. Horns honked faintly down on the street. I still had a splitting headache, and the feeling, new to me then, but now unfortunately all too familiar, of waking up with a nasty hangover, of important things forgotten and left undone. I went back to her bedroom and with trembling hands punched in the number of her cell phone so fast that I got it wrong and had to dial again, but she didn't answer. The service picked up. I left a message. "Mom, it's me. I'm worried. Where are you?" And I sat on the side of the bed with my head in my hands. Cooking smells had begun to drift in from the lower floors. Indistinct voices floated in from the neighbors' apartments, abstract thumps. Somebody opening and shutting cabinets. It was late. People were coming home from work, dropping their briefcases, greeting their cats and dogs and children, turning on the news, getting ready to go out for dinner. Where was she? I tried to think of all the reasons why she might have been held up, and I couldn't really come up with any. Although, who knew? Maybe a street somewhere had been closed off so that she couldn't get home. But wouldn't she have called? Maybe she dropped her phone, I thought. Maybe she broke it. Maybe she gave it to someone who needed it more. The stillness of the apartment unnerved me. Water spraying in the pipes and the breeze clicked treacherously in the blinds. Because I was just sitting uselessly on the side of the bed feeling like I needed to do something. I called back and left another message, this time unable to keep the quaver out of my voice. "Mom, I forgot to say that I'm at home. Please call the second that you get a chance, okay?" And then I called and left a message on the voicemail at her office just in case. With deadly coldness spreading in the center of my chest, I walked back to the living room. After standing there for a few moments, I went to the bulletin board in the kitchen to see if she had left me a note, though I already knew very well that she hadn't. Back in the living room, I peered out the window at the busy street. Could she have run into their drugstore deli? Not wanting to wake me, part of me wanted to go down onto the street and look for her, but it was crazy to think that I would spot her in rush hour crowds. And besides, if I left the apartment, I was scared I'd miss her call. It was past time for the doorman to change shifts. When I phoned downstairs, I was hoping Carlos, the most senior and dignified doorman, or even better, Jose, a big happy Dominican guy, my favorite, but nobody answered at all for ages until finally a thin, haunting, foreigning voice says, "Hello? Is Jose there?" "No," he said the voice. "No, you call back." It was, I realized, the frightening-looking Asian guy in safety goggles and rubber gloves who ran the floor waxer and managed the trash and did other odd jobs around the building. The doorman, who didn't appear to know his name any more than I did, called him the new guy and gripped around the management, bringing the housemen who spoke either English nor Spanish. Everything went wrong in the building. They blamed on him. The new guy didn't shovel the walks right. The new guy didn't put the mail where it was supposed to go or keep the courtyard clean like he should. "You call back later," the new guy was saying hopefully. "No, wait," I said, and he was about to hang up. "I need to talk to somebody." Confused pause. "Please, is anybody there?" I said. "Is an emergency." "Okay," said the voice wearily, in an open-ended tone that gave me hope. I could hear him breathing hard into the silence. "This is Theo Decker," I said, "in 7C. I see you downstairs a lot. My mother hasn't come home, and I don't know what to do." Long, bewildered pause. 7, he repeated, as if it was the only part of the sentence he understood. "My mother," I repeated. "Where's Carlos? Is anybody there?" No, sorry, thank you," he said in a panicky tone and hung up. I hung up the phone myself, in a state of high agitation, and after a few moments, standing frozen in the middle of the living room, went and switched on the television. The city was a mess. The bridges to the outer boroughs were closed, which explained why Carlos and Jose hadn't been able to get into work. But I saw nothing at all that made me understand what might be holding up my mother. There was a number to call, I saw, if somebody was missing. I copied it down on a scrap of newspaper and made a deal with myself that if she wasn't home in exactly 1/2 hour, I would call. Writing the number down made me feel better. For some reason, I felt sure that the act of writing it down was going to magically make her walk through the door. But after 45 minutes passed and then an hour, she still hadn't turned up. I finally broke down and called it, pacing back and forth, keeping a nervous eye on the television the whole time. I was waiting for somebody to pick up the whole time while I was on hold. Commercials for mattresses, commercials for stereos, fast, free delivery, and no credit cards required. Finally, a brisk woman came on, all business. She took my mother's name, took my phone number, and said my mother was on her list, but I would get a call back if her name turned up. Not until after I hung up the phone did it occur to me to ask what sort of list she was talking about. After an indefinite period of misgivings, walking in a tormented circuit through all 4 rooms, opening drawers, picking up books and putting them down, turning on my mother's computer, seeing what I could figure out from a Google search, nothing. I called back again to ask. "She's not listed among the dead," said the second woman I spoke to, sounding oddly casual, "or the injured." My heart lifted. "She's okay then?" "I'm saying we've got no information at all." "Did you leave your number earlier so we can give you a call back?" "Yes," I said. "They told me I would get a call back. Free delivery and setup," the television was saying. "Be sure to ask about our 6-month free financing." "Good luck then," said the woman and hung up. The stillness in the apartment was unnatural, even the loud talking on the television didn't drive it away. 21 people were dead, with dozens more injured. In vain, I tried to reassure myself with this number. 21 people wasn't so bad. Was it? 21 was a thin crowd in a movie theater, or even on a bus. It was 3 people less than my English class, but soon fresh shouts of fear began to crowd around me, and it was all I could do not to run out of the apartment, yelling her name. As much as I wanted to go out on the street and look for her, I knew I was supposed to stay put. We were supposed to meet the apartment. That was the deal. The ironclad agreement ever since elementary school. When I'd been sent home from school with a disaster preparedness activity book featuring cartoon ants with a dust mask, gathering supplies and preparing for some unnamed emergency. I had completed a crossword and dim questionnaires. What's the best clothing to pack in a disaster supply kit? A bathing suit. B, layers. C, a hula skirt. D, aluminum foil. And with my mother, devised a family disaster plan. Ours was simple. We would meet at home, and if one of us couldn't get home, we would call. But as time crawled by and the phone did not ring, and the death toll on the news rose to 22 and then 25, I phoned the city's emergency number again. "Yes," said the woman who answered with infuriatingly calm voice. I see here that you phoned in already. We've got her down on our list. Maybe she's in the hospital or something. She might be. I'm afraid I can't confirm that, though. What did you say your name was? Would you like to speak to one of our counselors? What hospital are they taking people to? I'm sorry, I really can't. Beth Israel, Lenox Hill? Look, it depends on the type of injury. People have got eye trauma, burns, all sorts of stuff. There are people undergoing surgery all over the city. What about those people that were reported dead a few minutes ago? Look, I understand that I'd like to help you, but I'm afraid that there's no Audrey Decker on my list. My eyes darted nervously around the living room. My mother's book, Jane and Prudence, Barbara Prim, face down on the back of the sofa. One of her thin cashmere cardigans over the armchair. She had them in all colors. This one was pale blue. Maybe you should come down to the armory, and they set up something for families over there. There's food, lots of hot coffee, and people to talk to. But when I'm asking you, are there any dead people that you don't have the names for, or injured people? Listen, I understand your concern. I really, really wish I could help you with this, but I just can't. You'll get a call back as soon as we have some specific information. I need to find my mother, please. She's probably in a hospital somewhere. Can't you give me some idea where to look for her? How old are you? Said the woman suspiciously. After a shocked silence, I hung up. For a few moments, I stared at the telephone, feeling relieved, but also guilty, as if I'd knocked something over and broken it. When I looked down at my hands and saw them shaking, it struck me in a whole impersonal way, like noticing the battery was drained on my iPod that I hadn't eaten in a while. Never in my life, except when I had a stomach virus that I'd gone so long without food. I went to the fridge and found my carton of leftover lo mein from the night before and wolfed it at the counter, standing vulnerably and exposed in the glare of the overhead bulb. Though there was also egg foo young and rice. I left it for her in case she was hungry when she came in. It was nearly midnight. Soon it would be too late for her to order anything from the deli. After I was finished, I washed my fork and the coffee thing from that morning and wiped down the counter so that she wouldn't have anything to do when she got home. She would be pleased, I told myself firmly, when she saw that I had cleaned the kitchen for her. She'd be pleased too, at least I thought so, when she saw that I saved her painting. She might be mad, but I could explain. According to the television, they now knew who was responsible for the explosion. Parties that the news was alternating calling right-wing extremist or homegrown terrorist. They had worked with a moving and storage company. With help from unknown accomplices inside of the museum, they had concealed the explosives within hollow carpenter-built display platforms in the museum shops where the postcards and the art books were stacked. Some of the perpetrators were dead, some of them were in custody, others were at large. They were going into particulars in some detail, but it was too much for me to take in. I was now working with the sticky drawer in the kitchen, which had been jammed shut since long before my father left. Nothing was in it but cookie cutters and some old fondue, skewers, and lemon zesters we never used. She'd been trying for well over a year to get someone in the building to fix it, along with broken doorknob and a leaky faucet and half a dozen other annoying little things. I got a butter knife, pierced at the edges of the drawer, careful not to chip at the paint any more than it was chipped already. The force of the explosion still rang in my bones, an inner echo of the ringing in my ears. But worse than this, I could still smell the blood, taste the salt and tin of it in my mouth, and I would be smelling it for days, though I didn't know that then. While I worked and worried at the drawer, I wondered if I should call somebody, and if so, who. My mother was an only child, and though technically I had a set of living grandparents, my father's dad and stepmother in Maryland, I didn't know how to get in touch with them. Relations were barely civil between my dad and his stepmother, Dorothy, an immigrant from East Germany who had cleaned office buildings for a living before marrying my grandfather. Always a cheery mimic. My dad did a cruelly funny imitation of Dorothy, a sort of battery-operated Hausfrau, all compressed lips and jerky movements, and an accent like Kurt Jurgens in the Battle of Britain. Though my dad disliked Dorothy enough, his chief enmity was for Grandpa Decker, all tall and fat, frightened-looking man with ruddy cheeks and black hair, dyed, I think, who wore lots of waistcoats and loud plaids, and believed in belt beatings for children. No picnic was the primary phrase I associated with Grandpa Decker, as in my dad saying, living with that bastard was no picnic. And believe me, dinner time was never any picnic at our house. I had met Grandpa Decker and Dorothy only twice in my life. Tense, charged occasions where my mother leaned forward on the sofa with her coat on her and her purse in her lap, and her valiant efforts to make conversation all stumbled and sank into quicksand. The main thing I remembered were the forced smiles and the heavy smells of cherry pie, pipe tobacco, and Grandpa Decker, not very friendly, wanting to keep my sticky little mitts off his model train set. All Alpine Village, which took an entire room of their house, according to him, was worth tens of thousands of dollars. I managed to bend the blade of the butter knife by stabbing it too hard into the side of this stuck drawer, one of my mother's few good knives, a silver knife that had belonged to her mother. Gamely, I tried to bend it back, biting my lip and concentrating all my wills on the task. As all the time ugly flashes of the day kept flying in and hitting me in the face. Trying to stop thinking about it was like trying to stop thinking of a purple cow. The purple cow was about all you could think about. Unexpectedly, the drawer popped open. I stared down at the mess: rusty batteries, a broken cheese grater, the snowflake cookie cutters my mother hadn't used since I was in first grade, jammed in old carry-out menus from Vadon, Shunley Palace, and Delamancos. I left the drawer wide open so that it would be the first thing she saw when she walked in, and wandered over to the couch and wrapped myself up in a blanket, popped up so I could keep a good eye on the front door. My mind was churning in circles. For a long time, I sat shivering and red-eyed in the glow of the television. As the blue shadows flickered uneasily in and out, there was no news, really. The picture kept turning in the night shots of the museum, looking perfectly normal now, except for the yellow police tape still rung on the sidewalk, the armed guards out front, rags of smoke billowing sporadically from the roof into the clay-lit sky. Where was she? Why hadn't she come home yet? She would have a good explanation. She would make this into nothing, and then it would seem completely stupid now how I'm even worried. To force her from my mind, I concentrated hard on an interview they were running again from earlier in the evening. A bespectacled curator in tweed jacket and bow tie, visibly shaken, was talking about what a disgrace it was that they weren't letting specialists into the museum to care for the artwork. Yes, he was saying, I understand that it's a crime scene, but these paintings are very sensitive to changes in air quality and temperature. They may have been damaged by water, chemicals, or smoke. They may be deteriorating as we speak. It is of vital importance that conservators and curators be allowed into the crucial areas to assess the damage as soon as possible. All of a sudden, the telephone rang, abnormally loud like an alarm clock, waking me from the worst dream of my life. My surge of relief was indescribable. I tripped and nearly fell on my face in my headlong dive to grab it. I was certain it was my mother, but the caller ID stopped me cold. NYDOCFS. New York Department of... What? After a heartbeat of confusion, I snatched up the phone. Hello? Hello there. The voice of a hushed and almost creepy gentleness. To whom am I speaking? Theodore Decker, I said, taken aback. Who is this? Hello, Theodore. My name is Marjorie Beth Wimberg, and I'm a social worker with the Department of Child and Family Services. What is it? Are you calling about my mother? You're Aubrey Decker's son, is that correct? My mother, where is she? And is she all right? After a long pause, a terrible pause. What's the matter? I cried. Where is she? Is your father there? May I speak to him? He can't come to the phone. What's wrong? I'm sorry, it's an emergency, and I'm afraid it's very important that I speak to your father right now. What about my mother? I said, raising to my feet. Please, just tell me where she is. What happened? You're not by yourself, are you, Theodore? Is there an adult with you? No, they've gone out for coffee, I said, looking wildly around the living room, ballet slippers askew in the chair. Purple hyacinth from a foil-wrapped pot. Your father, too? No, he's asleep. Where's my mother? Is she hurt? What's happened? No, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to wake your dad up, Theodore. No, I can't. I'm afraid it's very important. He can't come to with the phone. Why can't you just tell me what's wrong? Well then, if your dad's not available, maybe it's best if I just leave my contact information with you. The voice, while soft and sympathetic, was reminiscent to my ear of HAL, the computer, 2001 Space Odyssey. Please tell him to get in touch with me as soon as possible. It's really very important that he returns the call. After I got off the phone, I sat very still for a long time. According to the clock on the stove, which I could see from where I sat, it was 2:45 in the morning. Never had I been alone and awake at such an hour. The living room, normally so airy and open, buoyant with my mother's presence, had shrunk into a cold, pale discomfort, like a vacation house in winter. Fell fabrics, scratchy sisal rug, paper lamp shades from Chinatown, and the chairs too little and light. All the furniture seemed spitily poised at the tiptoe of nervousness. I could feel my heart beating, hear the clicks and ticks and hisses of the large elderly buildings slumping around me. Everybody was asleep. Even the distant horns and the occasional rattle of trucks out in 57th Street seemed faint and uncertain, as only as noise from another planet. Soon, I knew the night would turn dark blue. The first tender, gentle gleam of April daylight would steal into the room. Garbage trucks would roar and grumble down the street. Spring songbirds would start singing in the park. Alarm clocks would be going off in bedrooms all over the city. Guys hanging off the backs of trucks would toss fat, whacking bundles of Times and the daily news into the sidewalks around the newsstands. My mothers and dads all over the city would be shuffling around, wild-haired in underwear and bathrobes, putting on coffee, plunging in the toaster, waking their kids up for school. And what would I do? Part of me was immobile, stunned with despair, like those rats that lose hope in laboratory experiments and lie down in a maze to starve. I tried to pull my thoughts together. For a while, it had almost seemed as if I sat still enough and waited, things might straighten themselves out somehow. Objects in the apartment wobbled in my fatigue. Halos shimmered around the lamps. The stripes of wallpaper seemed to vibrate. I picked up the phone, but I put it down. The idea of calling the police terrified me. And what could the police do anyway? I only knew too well from television that a person had to be missing for 24 hours. I had just about convinced myself that I ought to go uptown and look for her in the middle of the night or no. And the hell with our family disaster plan, when a deafening buzz, the doorbell shattered the silence, and my heart leaped for joy. Scrambling, skinning harum-scarum to the floor, I fumbled with the lock. "Mom!" I called, sliding the top bolt, throwing open the door, and then my heart plunged 6 stories, dropped. Standing on the doormat were 2 people I had never seen in my life. A chubby Korean woman with a short, spiky haircut, a Hispanic guy in a shirt and tie who looked a lot like Lewis on Sesame Street. There was nothing at all threatening about them, but quite the contrary. They were reassuringly dumpy and middle-aged, dressed like a pair of substitute school teachers. But though they both had kindly expressions on their faces, I understood the instant I saw them that my life as I knew it was over. So that was our section. I think we're getting into some really good parts of this book, everybody. I'm excited about our next part. We'll be getting into, we're on page 70 right now, so keep reading along with me. Come back next time.